God, how I loved my husband. Will was tanned, blonde, and incredibly handsome. His hair was messy, his eyes were smart and gray, and his lips were always slightly touched by a smile. He could have any woman he wanted, and for some reason he chose me. Of course, he never relied on his looks. To be honest, he barely noticed her. When he first approached me in college, I thought he was going to ask for a pen or something. But instead, he sat down next to me and started talking to me. After 4 classes, he asked for my number. After 6, we became a couple. I wasn't beautiful. Children did not run away from me screaming in horror, but they never considered me a beauty either. Brown hair, brown eyes, too serious face, at least that's what my mother said. When we started dating, our friends were puzzled. Will's friends admitted that he had a penchant for blonde Amazons with perfect proportions and red manicures. My friends couldn't believe he didn't have tattoos. I was just going through a period of fascination with bad boys right before we met. Somehow, we made it work. As I already said, I loved him, and he loved me. He was a teacher, I was an accountant. We got married young and were constantly stressed. After we became husband and wife, our passion, of course, subsided. The love remained, but we were constantly tired. Sex did not happen every day, but once a week, and then once a month. Our life has become domestic, familiar, boring. The next big step for us would be parenthood, which we considered a matter of the near future. And then Jackson moved next door and ruined our American family plan to hell. Autumn was just starting to make itself known when Will and I had our first big fight. "Ashley, what do you want me to do? Seriously?" Will forcefully threw the steak he had just cooked onto the counter. "I don't know. Maybe I should say no sometimes." He rubbed his face tiredly. "I don't even understand why you're making this big deal." Maybe because you already come home at 7 in the evening as soon as you cross the bridge." I didn't like the way I sounded, like a teenager, capricious and immature. But I couldn't do anything about it. "And now you've signed up for extra classes 3 times a week. I don't know what time you will come now. This is extra money for us, Ashley. It's not forever." Will took a deep breath and looked at me softly, with that look that usually made me melt. "Try to understand, dear. It's not that I don't want to be here." He tried to touch me, but I moved away, still angry and annoyed. "When you come home, you're like a zombie. You don't have dinner with me, you don't even kiss me. You're too tired, too irritated. You're just overtired. And for what? You're just." But I stopped myself before I said words that could have hurt him greatly. But it seems it was too late. His face changed. Will's eyes narrowed. "Come on, say it. Say what you've been wanting to say since our wedding day, that I'm just a teacher. That I was supposed to become a famous writer, and now I'm just a teacher." He came closer, and I took a step back. He was furious. "Say it." Several minutes passed. Finally, he looked away and grabbed the keys. "Where are you going?" I asked timidly. The only answer was the slam of the door closing. When he was still not home by 10 o'clock in the evening, I took a bottle of red wine and went out onto the porch. The night was clear. It seemed like I could see every star. It was cool, but I didn't want to go get a blanket, so I took a sip straight from the bottle. I almost spilled all the wine when I heard a quiet chuckle. "Slow down, beauty. What will the neighbors think?" A man stood in the driveway, illuminated by the light from his porch. All I saw was the light from his cigarette and the fact that he was wearing jeans and a long-sleeved shirt. Something about him made my stomach do a slight somersault, although I couldn't see his face. I rolled my eyes. How 2007 it is. Then he would be just my type. I watched him exhale smoke. It was a fascinating sight. "I moved last week. I'm Jackson." "Oh, right," I finally spoke. I remembered seeing a moving truck. I wanted to come in and say hello. "Yes?" I heard a smile in his voice. He came into the light. He was unshaven and had copper-red hair. His deep green eyes slid down my body, taking in my sweatpants and stretched t-shirt. My hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, and I was sure my face was stained with tears. I wanted to get myself in order, and then I realized how stupid it was. Why should I care what he thinks of me? My name is Ashley. I smiled and nodded towards my house, and my husband is Will. Welcome to the area. I hope you like it here. Jackson rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Not impressed yet. My smile froze. Strange. Is it true? Why? He shrugged but didn't answer. There was something in his eyes as he took another drag on his cigarette that sent a chill down my spine. He didn't answer my question, but I continued, hoping to ease the awkwardness. And your wife? Does she like it here? A slow smile spread across his face. There is no wife. I moved here because Margaret is my mother, and I thought it was worth taking the opportunity. Margaret Miller was a neighbor of mine who had recently moved to Florida with her husband. However, she never mentioned children, and I never saw him come to visit. My confusion and suspicion must have shown on my face because he laughed. Mom didn't tell you any cozy stories? I felt uncomfortable, and I clearly felt that he was enjoying causing me this discomfort. Don't worry, beauty, he said, shaking off the ashes. I'm not her favorite. There was something attractive about him, a tension emanating from him that made me want to come closer. Your mom and I weren't particularly close. This unites the two of us, he chuckled. He rubbed his eyes and then looked at me for a long time with something incomprehensible in his gaze. It was neither fun nor lust. It was just ... interest ... I couldn't remember the last time I felt interesting, like someone worthy of a stranger's attention. Sure, sometimes men would still whistle at me when I passed on the street, or sometimes someone would try to hit on me in a bookstore, but it wasn't the same. I usually wore a wedding ring. This was a strong deterrent. Besides, I was no longer so interested in the world around me. Part of me stopped looking for mysteries and adventures. That part was engaged in clipping coupons and hunting for discounts in supermarkets. Suddenly, I realized that we had been looking into each other's eyes for an unknown amount of time. But even this realization did not make me turn away. The pleasant tension between us made me breathe faster and deeper. Reflexively, I touched my chest, and his eyes followed the movement. The connection was interrupted when Jackson threw down his cigarette and put it out. Time to go to bed, he said with a smile. It was nice to meet you. I'm sure we'll see you again very soon. Then he returned to his house. I exhaled. I didn't even know I was holding my breath. I fell asleep alone sometime after midnight. When I woke up the next day, I heard Will taking a shower. Usually, when we quarreled, we solved problems by pretending that nothing had happened. But this fight was so serious that I wasn't sure how things would go this time. He came out of the bathroom with just a towel wrapped around his hips and looked at me calmly as he pulled clothes out of the closet. The bathroom is free, he said, pulling a pair of socks out of the drawer. Will, I started, but he raised his hand to stop me. Just forget it. I know you didn't mean to say that. Everything is fine. But it wasn't normal. I saw it in his tense shoulders, in the fact that he avoided meeting my gaze, in the way he irritably straightened his tie. Maybe we just... Ashley. He turned around and finally looked at me. Forget. I've already experienced this. I promise. The steel in his eyes silenced me. The cowardly part of me was glad that we wouldn't have to discuss all this abomination again. But I understood that this was unhealthy. Besides, I was still a little angry that he signed up for extra classes. The time we spent together was so precious. How could he give even more time to work without even consulting me? Sorry, I blurted out before he could leave the bedroom. He froze and looked at me over his shoulder. I know. I didn't want to. He looked at the floor again. I know that too. I hate it when you get mad at me. Will exhaled and shook his head. He turned on his heel and sat next to me on the bed, pulling me into his lap. He brushed a strand of my hair back and placed his hands on either side of my face. I know that being married to me is not always what you imagined. It's not like that, I started, but Will pressed his finger to my lips. I know you, Ashley, better than you think. I can see when you're unhappy. He sighed into my neck. I'm trying. I try really hard, but you must meet me halfway. He pulled away and focused his gaze on my hair. He always loved my hair. You're right. I'll try to be better. He kissed me slowly, tenderly, making me want to drag him back under the covers, where it was warm and I was ready. Previously, at such moments, we would have already been undressed and connected. I might already be experiencing pleasure. Now Will has mastered the art of pulling away at the right time. My lips were no longer so hypnotic to him. He no longer had to touch me every 5 seconds. My mother warned me that this could happen, that the days of crazy caresses and insistent kisses would not last forever. As expected, Will pulled away, smoothing my hair with his hands. You don't need to be better. I just want you to understand, it can't be romance and flowers all the time. At that moment, I felt like a terrible person. Will worked, exhausting himself so that we could live comfortably, and I was angry that I could not get him to make love to me as often as I wanted. I kissed him, lightly biting his bottom lip, just because I couldn't help myself. He moaned into my mouth, but was still able to pull away. He set me back down on the bed, laughing when I tried to pull him towards me. Who am I kidding? I like it when you're like this, he said, licking my lips. You'll like it even more when you're inside me. Will smiled, but let me go. It's time for me to run. I'll try to be home for dinner, okay? I nodded slowly. He gently pinched my nose, and soon he was gone. I was wondering if I should indulge myself. If I don't do this, I'll be irritated all day. If I do, I might be late for work. Moreover, lately, satisfying myself has only aggravated the situation. Every time I experienced incredible pleasure from my own caresses, it became even harder for me without real sex. It was like a mirage of a luxurious feast for a man dying of hunger cruel and only intensified his hunger. As much as I wanted to just get ready for work and forget about everything, the feeling between my thighs wouldn't let me rest. The silk panties bunched up as I moved involuntarily, pressing myself against the bed. The desire to feel some kind of relief grew, and I rolled over onto my back, letting my thoughts carry me to Will. One hand instinctively reached under my nightgown, and I imagined that it was his rough, confident hands touching me. Everything was burning inside, and I squeezed my thighs, hoping for at least some relief. But something inside me still resisted, as if the necessary spark had never been ignited. Annoyed, I decided to change my focus by removing my nightgown and staying under the covers. The feeling of coolness on the skin intensified the feelings, but thoughts suddenly switched. The image of Jackson popped into my head, his thoughtful look, a cigarette in his hand, slowly exhaling. For some reason, this image, despite the fact that we barely knew each other, pierced me, and I felt my pulse quicken. A whole fantasy world unfolded inside me, and I let it carry me away on a wave of emotion. I imagined his smile and strength, and my body reacted to every imaginary moment. Everything escalated, and finally I felt release, quietly breathing heavily in the silence of the room. And so, when the emotions began to subside, I returned to reality, suddenly realizing who my thoughts were directed at. It wasn't Will, it wasn't my husband, it was a neighbor I barely knew. The shame washed over me, and I couldn't understand how I was so captivated by this. I glanced at the clock and realized that there was no time to be tormented by this unexpected turn. I quickly took a shower, put on my favorite purple dress and black heels, and applied my makeup in the car on the way to work. It wasn't until I reached the office door that I heard my friend Katie call out to me. Kathy was my colleague and good friend. She was almost 15 years older than me, but sometimes it seemed to me that I was more responsible. Katie was a true hurricane, tearing through people and places with amazing speed and skill. She was married a second time and remained a very sexy woman and proud of it. After we exchanged our usual morning greetings, I thought about Jackson again. When we sat down at our desks, which were side by side, I couldn't hold it in anymore. This morning, I satisfied myself by imagining our new neighbor, I whispered. Katie immediately put aside what she was doing and gave me a mischievous smile. Wow, is he hot? You have no idea, I whispered, biting my lip and nervously looking around to make sure no one was listening. Do you think this is normal? The devil knows, she shrugged. Probably not, but if you don't do anything forbidden, then this is not life. Katie's sharp blue eyes noticed my depressed state, and she rolled her eyes. Oh God, you Catholics. She rolled away from the computer in her chair and looked around. We all have fantasies. Believe me, it's natural. Is it true? My experience was that if Katie said something was normal, that meant it wasn't normal at all. She smiled at my suspicious tone. I fantasize about my gardener, but I actually met this guy, and I know my gardener, and I fantasize about other guys I know too. For example, about Sam. She nodded at a handsome man sitting a few tables away from us. I looked over my shoulder and met his gaze. He gave me a charming smile, and I probably blushed. As I already said, it's natural. Men fantasize about us too, honey. I know, I just feel guilty because I was thinking about him right after Will and I had our big fight. Katie shook her head. Thank God for the ability to fantasize. So you've never given in to impulse. She snorted. What? Can you imagine what Stephen will do to me if he finds out? Katie chuckled, shaking her head. Sometimes I don't understand which of us is a bad influence on the other. When I pulled up to my house, Jackson was standing at the end of his driveway, checking his mail. My heart skipped a beat when I saw his worn jeans that hung attractively on his hips and his simple but tight black t-shirt. Our eyes met through the windshield, and he smiled. I quickly jumped out of the car, embarrassed that I was caught looking at him. Good evening, he called. Hello, how are you? He tapped his fingers on the stack of letters. Tired. It's been a long day. I noticed a motorcycle standing nearby, further along its path. He saw me staring at him. This is mine. When you don't want to take a truck, I hope the noise doesn't bother you. Oh no, I said. I'm sure everything will be fine. Involuntarily, a fantasy came into my head. Jackson on a motorcycle, speeding along dark highways, and I sat behind him, hugging him tightly around the waist. It seemed as if he could read my thoughts as he tilted his head and looked at me appraisingly. Have you never ridden a motorcycle before? I just shook my head. He smiled softly. Maybe I'll give you a boost sometime. That would be great, I breathed. I always wanted to try it at least once. Good night, Ashley, Jackson said, lifting his chin in farewell. I watched him walk towards his house and forced myself to turn away and do the same. Will returned home early that evening. We went to a sushi restaurant and talked about work. But mostly I was thinking about the motorcycle. It seemed like I could already feel the vibration under my hips, this pulsating current rising up my spine, my hands pressed against Jackson's hard stomach. Is it working? I emerged from my fantasies and returned to my husband. Yes, you're all in your own thoughts today. I grabbed his hand and shook it tightly, hoping that his closeness would drive the bad thoughts out of my head. When we got home, I immediately noticed Jackson smoking outside with a couple of other men. My heart sank when I realized that Will would finally meet him. And of course, I was worried, like a schoolgirl passing by the guy I'm in love with. Jackson's eyes were already on me when I got out of the car. Will, let me introduce you to your neighbor. My husband followed me without even asking a question. How come I already know Jackson? He immediately came up to us. His friends were left behind. Hi, Ashley, he nodded. Then he looked at Will. You must be Will. Will extended his hand. Yes, nice to meet you. Mutually. Jackson's eyes, green and shining, turned back to me, and some kind of heat flared in them. It was so indecent to look at me like that in the presence of my husband. And anyway, it was indecent to look at me that way. I glanced nervously at Will. He didn't notice anything. Your wife is wonderful, Jackson said. Will smiled politely. Thank you, I think so too. And an adventurous. I'll give it a spin on my bike someday. I could almost hear something click in Will's head. Finally, it dawned on him that I already knew this guy and I hadn't mentioned it. His eyes darted to me, confusion and doubt were visible in them. Is it true? He asked. My cheeks flushed. Yes, Jackson was kind enough to offer. I thought it would be exciting, so I agreed. I can't imagine you on a motorcycle, honey, Will said with a hint of irritation. Jackson clearly picked up on the tone. His friendly smile turned sour. But I can. Something tells me that she will do great. Will's polite smile disappeared. Well, you're an expert. I've never been to one of these things. He turned to me. Shall we go home? Of course, I quickly agreed. This whole situation was too awkward. Good night, Jackson. Good night, guys. Will just nodded, pushing me towards the house with his hand on my shoulder. When we went inside, he was silent. He threw the keys on the coffee table, took off his shoes, turned on the TV all in silence. I was waiting for him to say something, waiting for questions, but they did not follow. In the end, I decided that I was being paranoid and calmed down. I went to the kitchen to make tea. As soon as I put the kettle on the stove, Will's voice came right behind me. When did you meet this guy? I jumped and turned around sharply. What? Jackson, our neighbor. When did you meet? 2 days ago. His eyes peered intently into my face. Why didn't you tell me? It somehow didn't come up in the conversation. Sorry. You have nothing to apologize for. I'm just surprised, that's all. You guys seem pretty close. I breathed a sigh of relief that this wouldn't turn into a scandal. He's just friendly. He is Margaret's son. Will looked at me with interest. They don't get along. That's why we've never heard of him. I'm not surprised. He looks pretty wild, especially with that Harley out front. Will took a deep breath. By the way, you won't ride it, you fool. You won't go? I asked again with disbelief. Come on, Ashley. The last thing I need is to worry about you being on a motorcycle with some weird guy. I understand your point of view. I agreed mainly out of politeness. But you won't go? He rolled his eyes and walked over to me. When he reached me, he slowly ran his finger down my forearm. With his other hand, he gently touched my cheek. You're mine, baby. You are dear to me. So yes, you won't go is the right word. I opened my mouth to say something cheeky in response, although there was something sweet in his words, but he stopped me with a kiss. He continued to kiss me, and we began to forget about everything except our bodies and the movements of our lips. The kettle whistled, but we didn't even notice it. Somehow, Will managed to pull my pants off, and now he was already inside me. Not even a moment passed before I forget about all this talk about permission, about motorcycles, and of course, about my wonderful neighbor. Will was supposed to be accompanying the school kids on a weekend trip the following week. Make sure all the doors are locked when you go to bed, he said, packing his suitcases into the car. Fine. I smiled at him. Don't worry about me. Everything will be all right. And don't forget to answer my calls and messages. Yes, Dad, I grinned. Will didn't appreciate my joke. He came up to me and kissed me deeply. When he pulled away, his eyes gazed into mine. I'm serious. I hate leaving you alone. My throat tightened. God, how I loved him. This feeling was often lost in routine, but I loved it. I loved him even in those moments when he was a real bore. I hate it when you leave too. I'll be back soon, he said, kissing my forehead. Then he got into the car, waved and smiled, and drove away. The next day, I lazily watered the garden that Will's mother had planted when we first moved in. Surprisingly, I still haven't managed to kill a single plant. Hello, girl. I looked up from the drooping hydrangea and smiled. Jackson leaned against the fence with a mocking smile on his face. I didn't think you were someone who was into gardening. I blushed and dropped the hose. I'm not interested. Actually, this is all thanks to my mother-in-law. He nodded, changing his body position on the fence, and I waited for him to say something else. But he was silent. Jackson seemed completely calm in the silence. I couldn't stand her even for a minute. Do you want to come over for a beer or something? He chuckled. I was just about to ask you to come out with me for a beer. It's time for a change of scenery. Will definitely wouldn't like it, but it would be rude to refuse, right? I ignored the fact that I really wanted to go myself. Certainly. Will you lead it, or should I? I'll lead, he answered, as if it were obvious. On a motorcycle. Oh, damn. Will definitely wouldn't approve. There was already an excuse on the tip of my tongue to refuse. You could say that I'm too afraid, and that would be true. But then Jackson came so close to me that our noses were almost touching. Come on, baby. A little fun won't hurt. 5 minutes later, I was sitting on his motorcycle, screaming with delight, with my hair flying in the wind and my arms wrapped tightly around his waist. At the bar we arrived at, Jackson seemed to know everyone. This was amazing to me, considering that I had never seen him with any of our mutual friends before. What, he made all these friends in the few weeks he lived here? Or did they remember him from the rare visits he apparently made that I didn't even know about? One thing was clear, everyone around him admired him. One of the guys worked with him at a car repair shop nearby. He insisted that Jackson could make my car scream with pleasure and that she would go crazy under his touch. The hidden meaning was obvious to everyone, and everyone laughed and applauded Jackson. The fact that I was married, as some of the locals knew, and that I was clearly wearing a wedding ring did not seem to matter, or it was simply ignored. I was a beautiful girl sitting next to their boyfriend who they thought deserved good sex. Jackson looked a little embarrassed every time someone told us to stop staring and go home. I didn't even realize I was actually doing it until they mentioned it. After that, I became a little withdrawn. My laugh became a little more forced, and the discomfort soon disappeared thanks to a couple more bottles of beer. When I choked on one particularly thick mouthful, Jackson patted me gently on the back, even though it wasn't necessary. I quickly came to my senses, but his hand remained there. The warm, heavy touch sent waves of pleasure through my body. We didn't talk to each other too much. I was discussing our neighbors with some guy, and Jackson was actively talking with his colleague, discussing how they were going to repair some amazing car. Evening came, and I felt my phone vibrate for the 5th time. I knew it was Will, but I didn't want to answer. At least not in this dirty, noisy bar. Jackson sensed my distraction and said goodbye to both of us. We slipped out into the cool evening air and mounted his motorcycle. When we returned home, Will managed to call me 2 more times. I answered the phone when the phone vibrated again. The voice was intermittent, and Will noticed it immediately. "What's happening? Why didn't you answer?" Jackson watched me while I lied. "Sorry, honey, I slept for a long time. I have a headache." Will's accusing tone softened. "Oh no, have you taken your pills?" "Yes, it's already getting better." Jackson tilted his head, looking at the sky, trying not to listen to our conversation. "I love you. I'm sorry I can't be there to take care of you. Everything is fine. Listen, I'm going to take a bath and try to go back to sleep. Call me in the morning." Will was silent for a minute. This was clearly not like me. I usually begged him to stay on the line as long as possible so I could spend every possible minute with him. Finally, he said, "Fine. Love you. Good night," I whispered before hanging up. I didn't know why I didn't say "love you" back like I always did, but the words stuck in my throat. Jackson cleared his throat when I ended the call. "It was fun. I'm a little drunk." "Me too. It's a shame I didn't drink more. I'm in the mood to get drunk." He chuckled. "What? The wine is out? Ha ha. Maybe you can come to me. I also have beer and can cook great steak fajitas." I felt like something inside me was warning me of an error. My heart was pounding and my stomach was regretting the beer I had drunk. But I still heard myself say, "Yes." Jackson smiled and lit a cigarette. "Yes," I repeated. "I wish I could." There was a football match on TV, but that didn't interest us much. Jackson watched as I quietly flipped through his photo album. Finally, I settled on one amazing photograph of a child who was clearly Jackson. He confirmed, muttering, "This is Mom and me." I ran my finger over his baby face. "You were so cute." "She didn't think so," he muttered and took a long sip of beer. "You remember your childhood too bitterly." His eyes flickered to mine. "Aren't we all like that? And you?" "Maybe, but I don't talk about it all the time." "No," he agreed. "You don't talk much about yourself at all. Shouldn't I be the mysterious one here?" I smiled at him. "You are already a mystery. Please don't be any more mysterious. I can't cope with who you are anyway." But he didn't smile back. Instead, he stared at me intently as I turned the pages, amazed at what an innocent child he was. I was fascinated by the photographs of a smiling boy, so carefree and happy. It was hard to reconcile this child with the gloomy, angry man sitting next to me. Then I thought about my childhood photographs. I'm in a school uniform, at graduation, at a diploma ceremony. I was sure that my smiles over the years from toothless to dazzling would also shock Jackson. I doubt he could reconcile the cheerful girl I was in the past with the cynical woman I have become. A woman who really wanted him, despite the wedding vows. "You seem distracted." I looked up from the album. "Oh no, everything is fine. Sorry." "What are you apologizing for?" Jackson tilted his head, studying me carefully. My expression, my hair, my dress, my posture. "No way. Please don't say sorry again. You've already apologized 50 times since you came in tonight." I bit my lip to keep from saying it again. Jackson seemed to notice or knew I was going to do it because he grinned. "You see how correct you are." "Sorry," I snorted. "This is not about me." "Of course," he said, leaning back on his elbow. He looked at me again and nodded to himself. "You are an example of correctness." "I'm not like that." He raised an eyebrow. "Is it true? Then why is it so important to you that everyone loves you?" "It doesn't matter to me," I said defiantly. "Where did you get the idea? You really want me to love you?" His words felt like icy water poured over me. It was humiliating that he understood this, and even worse that he said it out loud. And of course, I immediately blushed, which completely dispelled any attempts to pretend that this was not so. "Friendliness does not mean—" "I don't think you're just being friendly," he interrupted. He was absolutely calm, while I was almost out of breath and blushing more and more. This whole situation was so wrong. I shouldn't have been at his house drinking beer when my husband was out of town. Moreover, saying that it is important for me that he loves me sounded like the confession of a teenager. This had to be stopped. I was about to apologize and say goodbye when he continued, "I don't think you want to be just friendly with me." This made me freeze. "You don't want us to drink morning coffee and discuss the news. And you don't want me to water your plants while you and Will are on vacation." He moved closer to me so that his face was too close for my comfort. "You want me to have sex with you." "Hard." I gasped. I couldn't resist. It was like a fire exploded inside me. My heart was pounding wildly in my chest. My stomach instantly became on fire. I had heard and participated in dirtier conversations before, but this was something completely different. It was the way he said it, with what tone, with what confidence. Simple words, but they completely broke down my barriers. If he asked for something now, I would give in. But instead, I watched as he pulled away, picked up the remote, and turned up the volume on the football game. My mouth was still open, but my body couldn't catch up with my mind. Everything inside me was still burning, yearning for even the slightest touch. "You're unbearable," I finally said. Jackson chuckled. "Yes." At some point, I fell asleep. Football was never fun for me, and we drank a lot of beer. I woke up from the warmth behind my back and on my side. It took my sleepy mind a few seconds to realize that the warmth was coming from Jackson's body. He was fast asleep behind me on the sofa. The TV was on, its muffled hum and flickering lights almost making me fall asleep again. Then Jackson moved closer, and I felt it. He was excited and pressed persistently on my ass. "Crap. Ashley," he whispered in my ear. I didn't know whether he was awake or not yet, but it didn't matter. "SHH," I said, pulling his hand and pressing it to my chest. Tears came to my eyes. "Don't say anything. Please." His sigh was long, and I realized that he was cheerful and aware of what was happening, just like me. Jackson kissed my ear. His fingers gently massaged my breasts. He moved my t-shirt and bra to the side to gain better access. And then we started moving together, as if we had always moved this way. He pulled down my skirt and grabbed my panties at the same time. I restlessly rubbed myself against his jeans, not wanting to think about how wrong this all was. Because if I started thinking, I wouldn't be able to stop. And I didn't want to stop. I reached behind my back and impatiently pushed his hands away. Finally, he pulled off his jeans and boxers. "Ashley," he whispered again. "Shut up," I whispered back, tears streaming down my cheeks in endless trails. He hugged me and, approaching, felt our mutual attraction, connecting us in this moment of intimacy. His touch was gentle but sure, and the tension between us grew with each passing second. We remained immersed in our feelings, hearing only the muffled sounds of the television and our quiet signs. His movements were filled with passion, and I felt how excitement covered my entire body. Our connection became deeper and deeper, and every moment was filled with closeness and warmth. We moved in the same rhythm, immersed in a feeling of unity and harmony in anticipation of the final moment. He looked at me with a satisfied smile, and this look said that he appreciated every moment spent together. Later, he gently pressed himself against me, and we lay in silence, feeling each other's warmth, enjoying the peace and closeness. "Wow," he muttered. I stared at the ceiling blue, purple, red. Now the news was on the screen, impartially reporting the facts in a monotone voice, and I just slept with another man who wasn't my husband. How did this happen? A moment ago, I was a devoted wife, and now I slept with the unshaven biker who lives next door. Jackson turned his head towards me, and I looked at him. "How do you feel?" he asked. Every nerve in my body was shaking. My heart thundered in my chest, and my exhausted flesh yearned for continuation. I pressed myself against his cool body, unable to answer him in words. Because what could I say? Amazing, because I didn't sleep with my husband. Alive, because you let a stranger into you. Terrible, because I betrayed the only man who would never intentionally hurt me. I couldn't say anything, so I just curled around his body, silently. I woke up with a slight headache and someone lying next to me. For a moment, it seemed to me that I was in my own bed and that this man was my husband. I gradually realized that one, I was not home, and two, I could smell Jackson's cologne. The images from last night hit me one after another. Oh, damn. Although at least we were smart enough to clean up after everything. I didn't want this situation to get any messier. I was disgusted enough as it was. Then Jackson's rough hand slid over my stomach, and his lips touched my ear. He was cheerful. I didn't have time to sneak home to take a shower. Pretending like nothing happened won't work, even if I wanted to. "It's too early for a breakdown," Jackson muttered against my neck. "Let me have sex with you first, and then you can panic." "Wait," my voice was hoarse. "I can't. You've already done it." "Jackson." My chest tightened under my thin t-shirt. What the hell is wrong with me that the mere touch of another man makes me so horny again? What makes me so horny? What about Villa? What should I do with it now? Should I tell him? Or just shove it in a folder marked "Do not share with partner"? "Sounds like a yes," Jackson said, moving away from me and standing so that I was facing his groin. I looked up and met his gaze, and he ran his hand through my hair. "Was that a yes, Ashley?" I wanted to moan, but I tried to hold on. Thoughts about Villa almost cooled me down. "I can't." He knelt down and, grabbing my hips, turned me around so sharply that I felt dizzy. I was so stunned that I didn't even stop him. My head sank low on the back of the sofa, and my buttocks, barely touching him, were raised in his hands. We froze for a few seconds, looking at each other. And then I stopped thinking about anything at all, because he began to give me pleasure. The rest of the world disappeared, all my responsibilities, vows, promises. I screamed, cried, and swore. "Jackson," I begged, "please take me. I beg you." "That's a pretty weak plea." My head was darting from side to side. I was helpless. "I need you so much. I'm ready for anything. Please." It was brutal, animal sex. We didn't say a word, we just moaned and screamed. "Are you okay?" he finally asked. I could barely look at him. No. I hated him, I hated myself. I hated that my body was trembling, that it was yearning for more. What am I doing here? His hand lay on my thigh, as if to calm me down. I jumped up and looked at him angrily. "Don't touch me." He leaned back on the sofa and crossed his arms. Jackson stood up and pulled on his jeans. Don't be stupid. I'm not stupid. I'm terrified. I can't believe what we just did. I can't believe it felt so good. He handed me my skirt and panties. Well, believe it. I never disappoint in bed. Sorry. This. This was probably the best sex of my life. But you don't think I'll be delighted. I just cheated on my husband. Who am I now anyway? He shrugged and went to the kitchen. Just a girl. You're no saint, Ashley. I pulled on my skirt and put my panties in my bag. I almost forgot what it was like to walk in shame. I know I'm not a saint, okay? But that doesn't mean everything's okay, Jackson. He ignored me as he took the eggs and bacon out of the refrigerator. Breakfast. We need to talk about this. He sighed and finally looked at me. I'd rather sleep with some girl from the bar, one who wouldn't have to talk to me in the morning. Someone I wouldn't feel anything for, someone I'd probably never see again if we didn't want to sleep again. Of course I choose the girl next door, the married girl who turns me on more than anyone I've ever been with. I blinked. I'm not sure whether it was a compliment or an insult. His lips trembled. It was probably a backhanded compliment. I sat down. I feel sick. He didn't answer. He cracked eggs, fried bacon, and made coffee. A few minutes later, a full breakfast was already standing in front of me, and sitting opposite me was the same person who had just recently been inside me. He sat motionless, watching me, as if he was waiting for me to explode. Tears came to my eyes. Will was supposed to return home today. I betrayed his trust. She spat on her vows. I felt physically ill from this. And the worst thing is, I liked it. I'm not sure if I would have felt more guilty if the sex had been disgusting, but that didn't matter now. The sex was great, and I was afraid that I would want more. Yes, I felt guilty. I hated myself. My stomach was churning with nausea. The weight of remorse squeezed my chest. I kept thinking back to our wedding day, when Will amazed everyone by saying his own vows. I remembered how I felt next to him, warmth, love. I felt like Ashley. Now I felt like someone else, to those whom I hardly recognized. And none of it mattered, because despite all the guilt and remorse, I just wanted to kiss Jackson and get him back into bed. I'm a monster, I whispered. Jackson finally moved. He took the butter and spread it on the toast, as if I hadn't said anything. He acted as if this was all completely normal, which made it all seem even more unreal. What should I do? A tear rolled out of my eyes, and I hastily wiped it away, as if it had insulted me. Jackson met my pleading gaze. Eat. Then he returned to his breakfast. There was no comfort from him, no friendly pat on the shoulder, no encouraging words. He wasn't going to hold my hand or tell me what to do. He was nothing like Will. My heart was breaking at the thought. Will would take care of me, bring me tea, advise me what to do, give careful, unobtrusive recommendations. With Jackson, I was just a woman. I could do what I wanted, and I already did. I've done terrible things, disgusting things, things that will likely haunt me at night for years to come. Jackson stared at me as he sipped his coffee. I took the fork. When I returned home later that morning, I still felt as lost and confused as when I woke up. The only thing that had changed was that Will was coming back soon. His voicemail told me this. I could hear the worry in his voice, and it turned my regret into a corrosive pain. I ran into the shower, washing away all traces of the other man. Will I find out right away? Will I have a chance to confess? I didn't fully know what I would do when my husband returned home. When the shower was finished, I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked exactly the same. I remember trying to do the same after I lost my virginity. Will my cheeks be rosy and my eyes glow? Will I look like a woman? The truth was that I looked exactly the same. I should have turned pale or looked disgusting. A neon sign should have lit up on my forehead with the inscription, "Girl of Easy Vibrability." But the unpleasant, terrible, and unfair truth was that I looked exactly the same as I did the morning of the day Will left. I was wearing only a towel when the doorbell rang. I ran to get my robe, hitting my finger on the furniture in the process. The bell kept ringing several times as I hurried downstairs, trying to figure out who it could be. Katie stood in the doorway with a bag of fresh bagels and 2 cups of coffee. It was our Sunday morning, and I completely forgot about it. She looked at me and went inside. She put the food on the table and then turned around with an accusing look. "Where were you last night?" My heart sank. What is she getting at? I've never been a good liar, so I mumbled. "What are you talking about?" "At home. Here. Right here." Katie raised her cup of coffee. Well, of course. She was waiting for me to confess. She slowly paced back and forth, and I was shaking and trying to swallow. My throat was completely dry. It was very strange. "I called your cell phone 1,000 times because I was bored. I wanted to go to the cinema. In the end, I gave up and came to you. Your car was here, so I rang the doorbell 10 times. You didn't answer. My mind tried to find an excuse. I chose the best I could come up with. I slept." Katie smiled and took a sip of her coffee. Then she came up to me, and our noses almost touched. "Let's be honest, Ashley. You weren't at home. I used my spare key. I saw you through the window." My heart sank with horror. "What?" I asked in a trembling, almost unrecognizable voice. Katie stepped back and pulled a bagel out of the bag. She tried to torture me. "I saw you through the window. You had sex with that guy you must have been talking about." I almost fainted. I sat down heavily on the chair. It was a truly out-of-this-world experience. I couldn't comprehend what was happening around me. Did I really paint my kitchen walls red? What was I thinking? This was a terrible idea, and the curtains didn't match at all. Katie made a sound, and I was abruptly brought back to a reality that was much more important than the decor of my kitchen. She sat down opposite me, feigning calm, and then her face distorted with indignation. "What were you thinking?" I covered my face with my hands. "I don't know." My body shook with sobs. "I really don't know." My friend came up to me and hugged me. SHH. Everything is fine." "No, it's not okay." She stroked my head. "Are you going to tell him?" I wiped my tears. "Don't think. It hurts him too much." "Shouldn't he know?" I shook my head helplessly. I wanted to call my mother. My parents moved to California a year ago, and it seemed like an endless distance away. I still called her for advice, but this was different. She was distracted by their dog, and I continued to pretend to be the perfect wife. If she found out what happened, it would destroy her. She considered Will an ideal husband. She would never look at me the same way again. Katie returned to her seat and calmly ate a piece of the bagel. "You know, Stephen cheated on me once." I stopped crying from shock. "What?" "It was many years ago," she shrugged. "We went for consultations. I forgave him. I never knew." "No," she said. "I feel like I'm in pieces. I'm devastated." "And that's right." "You cheated on your husband," Katie laughed dryly. "You should be the one who suffers." "I can't tell him," I whispered. "It will kill him." "What should I do?" She thought for a minute. "Telling him now would be selfish. You will only do this to alleviate your guilt. Make a promise to yourself, promise yourself, and will that you will never, ever betray his trust again." I sobbed. "Never. I'm so ashamed of this." And this morning, I barely recognized myself. "This morning?" Katie interrupted. "Did you stay with him overnight?" "Yes." Her eyes widened. "Did you sleep with him again?" My face answered for me. Katie stood up, grabbed her purse and a cup of coffee. "You need therapy. Urgently." "I know." I stared at my hands. "This is wrong." Katie blew me a kiss. "Call me when you're ready. I'm always here for you." "Thank you." She left me alone in the kitchen. The sun was already setting, and I was still sitting motionless. Will was about to return home. Will arrived later than expected. I have already prepared lasagna, lit the candles, and poured the wine. I sat in a short dress by the window, looking at the Christmas lights that were long overdue to be taken down. Soon his car pulled into the driveway. I couldn't see him as he got out of the car in the dark, but soon his blonde hair appeared at the front door. His gray eyes met mine, and a wide smile spread across his face. "Miss you, girl." I went to him and hugged him as tightly as I could. making sure he was real. Thoughts of Jackson popped into my head again, and I froze, remembering the feeling of his lips on my body. Will pulled me away and peered into my face. "Are you okay? I just missed you." He kissed the top of my head. "It smells delicious. I made lasagna." Will smiled. "My beloved." We were silent at dinner. I asked him a little about the trip. He asked me what I did while he was away. When we finished, he joined me in the kitchen, helping me wash the dishes. All this time there was a struggle inside me, to tell him or not about what I did. Twice I thought about confessing everything. Various scenarios tormented me. Pretending like nothing happened was much harder than telling him the truth. But I remembered what Katie had said and tried to keep my mouth shut. What Will doesn't know can't hurt him. I just had to look to the future. Get rid of Jackson. He doesn't mean anything to me. Later, we went to bed. Will went first, and I stayed in the bathroom, looking in the mirror, trying to figure out what I could read in my eyes. Maybe they have become brighter. To me, they looked guilty. I was sure that if Will looked in them long enough, he would know all my secrets. Will knocked on the bathroom door after some time. "Are you okay there?" I flushed the toilet and turned on the faucet. "Everything is fine. I'll go out now." When I returned to the bedroom, Will was already lying under the covers. I climbed in and immediately found him naked and more than ready to make love to me. It surprised me, to be honest. I instantly wanted to refuse, to find an excuse to sneak out, citing a headache. His hands slid over my body, exploring every line. My eyes closed. His touch used to make me shiver. I lost all ability to think, turning into a useless mass. I became completely helpless. Now I panicked. My muscles tensed and my knees tightened. My body literally refused to let him in. Something deep inside my mind said that this was wrong, that we needed to talk. Kathy's advice that we should see a therapist seemed like the best idea I'd ever heard. If he noticed my reaction, he didn't show it. His fingers continued to slide down my stomach until they reached my silk panties. He massaged me through the cloth. My flesh was ready to accept his caresses, even if my mind was against it. "You smell so good," he sighed. He threw his leg over me, holding me close to him. "I need to be inside you." "I don't think I can now," I whispered. "I need you so much." His lips found mine. How convenient it was. How familiar it was. My body succumbed to the memories, and I stretched into bed, spreading my legs. "God, how I want you, baby." I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I've been missing these words so much lately. For a long time, it seemed to me that my passion remained unanswered. "Let me in, baby. I can't be gentle. I've been thinking about you all weekend." My heart was burning. "Everything's fine." He got down to business, kissing my neck while he had sex with me furiously. He whispered words of adoration. It was all wonderful, but I couldn't enjoy it. And to be honest, it didn't even matter to me. Watching him lose control because of me was more than enough. He kissed my cheek and pulled the blanket over us. I turned on my side, and he hugged me from behind, his hand remaining on my chest. He must have felt how hard my heart was beating, but he didn't know that it wasn't because of sex. He fell asleep almost immediately. One tear rolled down my face, slowly falling down my nose and cheek. The next week, I kept trying to avoid Jackson, keeping an eye out for his motorcycle. Sometimes it stood in front of his house, as if it served as his calling card, letting me know he was nearby. I pretended that this bike was calling me, and every time I passed by and hurriedly entered my house, I felt brave. The terrible thought was that he might already have forgotten about me, that the kisses we exchanged and that brief understanding of each other meant nothing to him. It drove me crazy. Was he really watching our house from the window, counting the lights off the same way I watched him? As the week progressed, the feeling of guilt about our connection waned. In its place, jealousy rose, and lust. At night, when Will and I went to bed, I lay there, remembering our meetings with Jackson over and over again until I was suffocated with desire. I couldn't continue like this. Katie would sneakily watch me at work, silently asking me if I was a good girl. I always nodded at her and then started talking about something else. But her piercing gaze followed me throughout the office. My remorse and my desire became intertwined, becoming one huge weight around my neck that I was sure I would never be able to remove. Saturday has arrived. The anniversary of my betrayal. I was tense and anxious. Will watched my anxiety with a curious expression on his face. I constantly reminded myself that I needed to calm down, otherwise he would begin to suspect something was wrong, but I was unable to do so. Jackson's friends had gathered, and every now and then we heard the roar of motorcycles. After dinner, I couldn't stand it anymore. I grabbed my keys and announced that I was going to the pharmacy. Will was sitting in a chair, reading some boring book. He looked at his watch. It was about 9 in the evening. "Do you want me to go with you?" "No, everything is fine. I won't be long." I saw how he held back from asking what I needed to buy. I could almost hear his thoughts. "I don't want to be annoying. She's been acting weird lately, but I don't want to make her any more nervous. I'll ask about this later." Finally, he smiled. "Cold. Do you need anything?" He thought for a moment. "No, thank you. See you soon." A few minutes later, I found myself outside under a cold, starry sky. It seemed that all the stars were visible. They witnessed everything. Jackson stood surrounded by his friends, a cigarette dangling from his lips and his eyes looking straight at me. The conversations died down as I got closer. "Hello, guys." A couple of men muttered something in response. Jackson flicked the ash off his cigarette. "Are you going somewhere?" he asked. I nodded. "Just to the pharmacy." He exhaled a puff of smoke, appearing completely relaxed, like a lazy tiger under the sun. "Which one?" "The one on the corner of Viola." "Have a good time," he said, as if letting me go. My eyes blinked several times. I didn't know what I was expecting to hear, but it certainly wasn't this. Several of his friends smiled as they looked at the ground. It was incredibly awkward. "Thank you." "Have a nice evening, guys," I said, trying to sound calm. The ride to the pharmacy was a disaster. Thoughts swarmed in my head, and I rushed through the streets as if on autopilot. What was I thinking about going there? Why did I come up with this ridiculous excuse about going to the store? What did I even hope to get out of this? When I parked, my mood became even more depressed. I stopped the car far from the pharmacy, in complete darkness. I felt like the crying was about to start, and I didn't want to make another scene tonight. As soon as I turned off the ignition, the driver's door swung open and a strong hand pulled me out. Before I could scream, a hand covered my mouth. "SHH," Jackson whispered. He then climbed into the driver's seat, pulling me along with him. The door slammed shut, and we found ourselves in a cramped space, the steering wheel almost cutting into my back. He kissed me. "I didn't hear your motorcycle." His hands quickly slid over my hips. "I came by car." "What are you doing?" "What you wanted," he answered calmly, pulling off my shirt. His tongue and smell distracted me, but I still wanted answers. "I didn't ask for this." Jackson laughed, throwing his head back to look at me. "Darling, you have no idea what your eyes were telling me tonight." "Crap. This is wrong." He nodded slowly, sliding my bra off my shoulder. "But you want it, more than anything else. The guilt will come later," he suggested. I smiled, although I tried my best not to. "It doesn't work like that." "Doesn't work? Feeling guilty now?" His fingers slowly unzipped my jeans. "Yes," I whispered. His hand reached inside. "Do you want to stop?" My eyes closed. "No." We had sex right there, pressed together. It was awkward, with the steering wheel pushing against me and Jackson's body hanging on top. Sometimes we had to stop and change lanes. We laughed for a moment, talked until the passion took over again. It was the best sex of my life. When we finished, it was hard to come back to reality and admit that the world kept spinning while we were in my car, even though it felt like everything should have stopped. He kissed me. Before getting out of the car, he leaned towards my ear. "Next time, don't make me wait so long." He got out, letting the icy air into the car. When I returned home, it was snowing. Will stood outside, holding the phone to his ear. Coming closer, I heard him say to someone, "It's okay, she's back." "Yes, thank you," and hung up. He rushed towards me and grabbed me by the shoulders. "Where the hell have you been?" I, "You were gone for 2 hours. Do you understand how scared I was?" "Sorry." His eyes examined my disheveled hair, rumpled clothes, wild look. "Where have you been?" "In the store. I lost track of time." "You didn't buy anything." I desperately tried to come up with an excuse. "I didn't find anything and just decided to go for a ride." "That's not like you, Ashley." "Sorry." He hugged me tightly and kissed my neck. I was so worried. "Don't do that again." "I'm sorry," I repeated again, knowing that this was not enough. Sunday passed quietly. Jackson's house was dark and quiet. I never saw him come in or out, and I hated myself for worrying so much. Horrible fantasies of him having sex with 1,000 faceless girls were spinning in my head, and I was torn by the fact that I had no right to be jealous. On Monday morning, I went out to the car after Will had already left. There was a dead bird lying on the path. I didn't believe in superstitions, but I shuddered at the thought that this was an omen of something terrible. Then I chuckled. I don't need a dead bird to tell me trouble is around the corner. I walked past, hoping that Will would do something about it later. When I arrived at work, Katie was already standing at my desk with a cup of coffee in her hand. Her eyes sparkled as if she knew something. I tried to act natural. "Good morning." Will called me on Saturday evening. He was in a panic. I sighed and put my bag on the table. "I know. I went for a ride, just thinking." Katie didn't look convinced, but went back to her seat. I typed furiously all morning, thinking it was none of her business. Of course, she was my friend, and it's a friend's duty to tell you when you're making mistakes. She did this for me. But now her constant glances did not help me. By lunchtime, my stomach was twisting so badly that I began to suspect that I was giving myself an ulcer. Around 3, my boss, Bob, came up to me. He examined my table with some strange attention. I got goosebumps. Something was wrong. Bob handed me some tables with an apologetic smile. "Are you all right?" I took the sheets and started looking through them. "Yes, why do you ask?" "There are a lot of mistakes on these tables, Ashley." "This doesn't sound like you." It became difficult for me to speak. "Mistakes?" Bob nodded and shrugged slightly. "Several calculations turned out to be seriously erroneous. Maybe we've overloaded you too much." "No, not at all. Sorry, I wasn't feeling well and—" "Don't worry, Ashley. This is not such a serious problem. At least for now. I just wanted to warn you." I forced myself to swallow. "Certainly. This won't happen again." He patted me lightly on the shoulder. "I'm sure it won't happen again." After he left, Katie walked over to my desk. She picked up the papers and made a disgruntled sound. "This novel is seriously ruining your life." "Listen, I didn't tell you about this so that you would rub my face in it every time," I said, raising my voice, and immediately looked around to make sure that no one heard us. "I'm really trying to be better." "Is it true? Is that why you went to sleep with your lover again on Saturday?" My eyes widened and my heart sank. She shook her head. "I wasn't sure you did it until now." "What's going on with you, Ashley? This doesn't sound like you at all." I could barely look at her. "I can't control myself." "Have you looked for a therapist? I can give you a good contact." I sobbed. "Fine." Katie stroked my hair. "Sorry for putting so much pressure on you. I just love you and feel responsible for you, especially since you can't call your mom for advice right now." "I know. Thank you. Do you think maybe we should tell Will? This might help you stop." I raised my head sharply and quickly shook it from side to side. "No. No, I can't. I promise I won't see Jackson again." Katie's face became stern. "Fine, because if you don't stop, I'll tell Will myself." I inhaled sharply. "You can't. It would be so wrong. You won't do this." She nodded. "To save you from yourself, I will do this." "It's none of your business. You are my business. You're my best friend, and I won't let you ruin your life over some bad guy in a leather jacket." She returned to her desk, leaving me shaking. Katie and I barely spoke for the rest of the day. We were angry at each other. We both had our reasons, but I thought she was especially wrong. She was my friend. She should have supported me in difficult moments and not run behind my back and tell my husband everything. Now I have to be doubly careful. But then I realized what I was thinking and slapped myself on the forehead. No need to be careful. Jackson and I are finished. Let him bring home those girls from that dirty bar, the girls with too much lipstick and too short skirts. I'll suggest we'll go to counseling. He will agree. I knew it from the hint of worry on his face lately. When I returned home, I walked towards the house completely distracted. My heel was only half a step away from crushing that damn bird. Will left her here, gray and lifeless, for me to deal with. Her feathers were stuck together, her paws were stiff and raised up. Her little eye looked at me as I examined her. I grabbed the shovel, silently cursing Will. I picked it up on a shovel and wondered what to do with it now. Just throwing it in the trash didn't seem right. Sighing, I carried her into the yard. On my knees, I dug a fairly decent grave. She put the bird inside and returned the earth to its place. Say a few words. I shuddered and looked around. Jackson leaned against our fence. Can you stop doing this? He raised his eyebrows. Is this your damn sneaking? I've had enough scares lately, thank you. Worried, darling? SHH. I looked at the house. Only the flashes of the TV were visible through the window. Go home. Yes, yes. Can I see you tomorrow? No. Why not? I ran my hand through my hair and laughed bitterly. This is not a joke, Jackson. This is my life. I'm not laughing. I can't see you anymore. He straightened up and bowed his head. You will see. I can't. He rubbed his jaw, but I managed to notice a smile on his face. Okay, as you say, good night, Ashley. He went back to his house. Crap. Why did it seem to me that there was a thread between us, connecting me with him? It was so annoying. With every step he took into the distance, my heart beat wildly, begging me to follow him. My legs started moving before my brain could stop them. My heels sank into the ground as I ran after him. He had just reached his back door when I threw myself on his back, hugging him as tightly as I could. It works. Quiet. It's not that dark yet. People will see. I squeezed him tighter. I don't want to stop seeing you. I know, but I have to. He was silent. Don't you understand? All I understand is how much I want to take you upstairs. There was such a threat in these words that I immediately let him go. I took a few steps back, tucking my hair behind my ears. My unexpected and desperate gesture embarrassed me. Come to me tomorrow, he whispered. My eyes slid towards the house. Smoke was pouring out of the chimney. Will must have lit the fireplace. He was probably drinking a glass of wine and watching the news. Was waiting for me. At what time? Any time. I rushed towards him, kissing him hotly but quickly. Then I ran back to meet my husband. Ash, get up. I groaned and pushed Will's hands away from me. He laughed. It's time to get up. I can't. He started tickling my sides. So many years have passed, and it's still impossible to wake you up. I sat up and rubbed my sleepy and heavy eyes. I don't feel well. Will sat down next to him and put his hand to his forehead. You don't have a temperature. I'm just tired. I patted him on the shoulder. I think I'll take sick leave today. Will looked at me in disbelief. You never take sick leave. Well, I'll take it today. Maybe I said it a little sharply. You haven't been at ease lately, my dear. Everything is fine? Did I do something? At that very moment, I felt terrible. No, you didn't do anything. It's all about me. He took my face in his hands. What's happened? I'm just on edge. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I need to rest a little. He continued to look at me with suspicion, but still nodded. Okay? If you need anything, call me, okay? I kissed his hand. Finally, I heard his car disappear into the distance. I jumped out of bed, put on my shoes, and ran to the man living next door. Sorry, I just didn't like Casablanca. Jackson snorted. You have no taste. I ran the washcloth over his wet chest, playing with the bubbles. It's a boring film. He changed position in the bath and pinched my butt. You must agree with everything I say. That's how it works. Oh, yes. His face made me smile and I kissed him. After that, we were silent for some time. I loved his bath. Baths were everything to me, and the fact that he had such a cool bath made me squeal with joy. I ran my hands over my body. The silky water made everything feel so luxurious. Jackson looked at me with sleepy eyes, his head resting on the tiled wall. Are you going to leave your husband? I froze. He moved his hands to my shoulders, massaging them to calm me down. I relaxed a little. Don't know. Do you think I should? What do you think? I wasn't sure what he was asking. Did he want me to leave for myself or for him? He must have understood my thoughts because he chuckled. Yes, I would like to be with you all the time without this marriage crap. It's not particularly nice to know that the girl you're sleeping with is wearing a wedding ring. But it seems to me that you are unhappy, don't you? Why else would you be sitting in this bathtub with me? I sighed. Don't know. It's obvious that you're unhappy. This is why you cheat on your husband. I rolled my eyes, annoyed that he brought this up. Is this your expert opinion? No, you are the first married woman I have been with. Just saying. Why do people cheat? I don't want to philosophize now, okay? He ran his soapy hands over my back. Why are they cheating, Ashley? I sighed. I don't know why I do this. Maybe because you're so delicious. He hugged me tightly and smiled slightly. Seriously, I think I was just unsatisfied. Communication between Will and I broke down at some point, and neither of us tried to fix it. His fingers gently slid along my collarbone. Do you think you can still fix this? I looked at his lips. Don't know. You're leaving him, Ashley? We didn't speak anymore. He made us tea while I walked around the living room. Margaret, his mother, left most of her things here. There was a family portrait on the wall, one of the few, Jackson said. Margaret looked down on me, judging me as much as I was judging myself. I was still in a towel. Jackson was completely naked. I liked this cozy closeness between us. It wasn't like the uncertainty you get with a new guy. The butterflies in our stomachs were there, and it was exciting, but we understood each other so well, as if we had been adults for a long time and confident in our feelings. It's amazing how little we needed to say to understand each other. The kettle whistled. I turned to the kitchen and saw Jackson looking at me. Our eyes met, and neither of us looked away. At that moment, something happened between us, something that warmed my heart and enveloped my mind in a pleasant haze. We were sharing something incredibly special. I wondered if this would be enough to make me leave Will. I knew I would never feel this way again. Finally, he turned away, and I got a great view of his ass as he went to turn off the stove. At that same second, the doorbell rang. Jackson groaned, and I wrapped myself tighter in the towel. He put on his boxers, rubbed his hair, and walked proudly to the door, despite the fact that he was wearing almost nothing. If it's one of the women on our block, they'll probably faint at the sight. I tried to stay out of sight, but I had nowhere to hide. I froze at the entrance to the kitchen, hoping that whoever it was would leave without looking behind Jackson. Jackson opened the door and his body immediately tensed. "Hello," said a familiar voice. "I'm looking for my wife. Haven't you seen her?" Jackson cleared his throat. No, I didn't see it." "Is it true?" Will muttered, clearly not believing. "Mrs. Thompson, the woman across the street, said she saw Ashley come in here." "Are you sure you didn't see her?" Jackson shook his head. "No." They were silent for a minute. My eyes closed, and I began to pray to the God I had never believed in to believe him. "Her car is still in the driveway." "Maybe someone took it," Jackson said. It was so confident that I almost believed him. Will wasn't convinced. I doubt. "Listen, if you need help finding. I know she's here. Tell her to come out. Right now. Everything has disappeared. If I didn't know better, I would have thought I had lost my hearing. The world around me became so quiet, I couldn't even hear my heartbeat. But the light, the colors around me suddenly became frighteningly bright. This made my eyes hurt. Ashley. Will's scream was full of pain and rage. "Come out here." My legs started walking on their own. I looked out from behind Jackson and saw Will's body sag. It seemed that all the blood had left him, all the muscles stopped working. "It's true," he whispered. "Forgive me, the tears came to me too late. Sorry, Will, I don't." "Shut up," he muttered. "Just shut up." The clouds covered the sun, and all the sickly colors disappeared. "Will," I said, "shut up." His eyes met mine. They were filled with rage and violent, uncontrollable anger, and it made me take a step back. He then turned his gaze to Jackson. He looked at him intently, examining him from head to toe. I saw his face contort in disgust as his gaze settled on Jackson in his boxers, clearly aware of why we were both nearly naked. "Go outside," Will said quietly. I wasn't sure who he was talking to. Jackson turned to me, and Will grabbed his arm and pushed him outside into the fading daylight. "You're a bastard. Do you like sleeping with other people's women?" Jackson stood firmly on his feet. "Only those who come to me themselves." Will seemed to be blown away, his gaze darting back to me. He then struck Jackson sharply. Everything happened so quickly that I did not have time to understand who had struck the first blow. They started fighting, rolling on the ground and banging each other's heads on the sidewalk at every opportunity. I tried to get closer to stop them, but I was afraid of getting hit. I screamed and begged them to stop, tears rolling down my cheeks. The towel slipped off me and fell to the ground. What a sight it was. Neighbors came out of their houses to watch. Jackson and Will rolled on the ground, trying to hit each other as many times as possible. A few minutes later, police cars arrived. The police shouted commands that I did not hear and could not understand. Everything sounded like it was happening underwater. I stood there, naked and shaking, watching my life crumble before my eyes. We were sitting on a couch in the emergency room waiting room. Will and me. I didn't know where Jackson was taken. I could only hope that he was not taken to prison. I glanced briefly at Will from time to time, hoping to see that he was okay. But he didn't pay attention to me. I don't blame him. Will needed 5 stitches in his cheek. He didn't make a sound as the nurse stitched his skin. He also didn't pay attention to me, and I don't blame him. When he was discharged, he took the papers and silently left the hospital. I walked a few steps behind him. When we got to the car, he froze, waiting for me to open the locks. As soon as he heard the locks click, Will sat down in the passenger seat. The radio played during the long, surreal drive home. Halfway through, Will hit the radio, turning it off. For the rest of the trip, I only listened to his breathing. When we arrived, he immediately got out of the car and headed into the house. When I walked in, I saw him working in our bar. He took out a large old bottle of whiskey and ripped the cap off. He took several large sips. Only then did his reddened eyes meet mine. "You must think I'm a complete idiot." I shook my head. "No, I don't think so." "Is it true?" "I think you do, or at least very gullible." He waved his hand around himself. "But it is so." "Will, don't even start. I don't want to hear your excuses. I don't even want to hear your sorry." He took another sip. "Your damn sorry means nothing to me. Your face means nothing to me." He came up to me. I flinched, afraid that he would hit me. Seeing this, he stepped back. "Do you know who you are, Ashley?" "Will, please," I sobbed. "Do you know who you are?" "No, I don't know." Will wiped his mouth. "You are nothing. Waste of time. A girl of easy virtue. Choose for yourself." "I'm so sorry. I never wanted." "Take your disgusting apology, I didn't mean to offend you, and your miserable existence from my house." I froze in place, not knowing what to do. Then I packed my keys and bag and hit the road. "And don't even think about spending the night at Katie's." I stopped and looked around. Will smiled for the first time since he found me. "She also thinks you're worthless." She told me everything. Of all the upheavals that occurred that day, this was the biggest. It shouldn't have been. I should have foreseen that this would happen. But I didn't see it coming, and he pierced me like a cold knife to the bone. He came closer to me. "You understand?" "Yes." "Sorry, I can't hear you," he said, theatrically raising his hand to his ear. "You said you understand." I couldn't breathe. Yes. Fine. He finished the bottle. Now get out. Where to go when your life is falling apart? I didn't know. Katie was my closest friend, and now she clearly didn't want me showing up on her doorstep. Other friends would be confused, and I didn't have the strength to admit what had happened. My mother was too far away. The pain of losing not only my husband, but also my best friend settled in my chest while I aimlessly drove around our city. I was lost, crushed, and the worst thing was how self-hatred boiled in my stomach. Luckily, Will didn't block our credit cards. I pulled into a nearby motel and took a long, cold shower. When she finished, she sat on the edge of the bed and combed her hair. I put socks on my icy feet. I tried to turn off my thoughts and not think about how I ruined everything. But of course, this was impossible. I turned on the TV, mindlessly flicking through channels. I couldn't even imagine what would happen next, but I knew that, no matter what, I still loved my husband. Or at least, I once did, and I desperately wanted to return to that state. How's Jackson? No, I couldn't think about it now. I turned my attention back to Will. I might have to wait until he sobers up before I crawl on my knees to him. We'll have to give him a few days. After some time, I noticed that my phone was vibrating. A heavy heaviness settled in my chest when I saw that it was my mother. I knew Will called her. Hello? My voice trembled with fear. Ashley, I'm very worried. Are you okay? I burst into tears and told my mother everything. She said Will called her, drunk and sobbing. She didn't judge me, but she did express her disappointment, and it hurt much more than if she had expressed outright disgust. I can't believe it. This is not the Ashley I raised. I sobbed. I know, Mother. I'm so sorry. What are you going to do? I don't know. Beg for forgiveness. Praying that he doesn't file for divorce. Mom was silent for a while. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible, as if she didn't want to say those words. What if he does it anyway? What were you thinking, Ashley? I don't know what I was thinking. Everything was complicated between us. Will was working hard, and I was lost in my own thoughts. And this man? Mom cleared her throat. What is he like? How do you feel about him? I sat down on the bed. I don't know. He makes me feel different. How else? As if I'm not just a wife or an accountant. It is fun to communicate with him. He listens to me. Oh, Ashley, honey, I don't even know what to tell you. It's obvious that the problems you and will have are much more serious than just his absence due to work. I wiped the tears from my cheeks. I know, Mom. What should I do now? Do you want a divorce? The very word divorce terrified me. It caused such a protest in my body that I felt sick. No. Then fight to get him back, Ashley. Work on it. The next morning, I called work and said that I would take sick leave again. Who cares? I wasn't there yesterday anyway. People will think I'm still sick if Katie is generous. Otherwise, they will start whispering about me about this slut whose life went downhill, who gave up everything for a cute guy on a motorcycle. My neighbors will definitely think so. I'm wondering how Jackson deals with all of this. My body froze as I realized how dangerous my thoughts were. I couldn't allow myself to think about Jackson. I couldn't yet. By noon, I called Will. His phone immediately went to voicemail. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I tried again. Again, nothing. I wanted to give him time and space, but I was seized with fear. He was in a terrible state last night. I was embarrassed to call his friends and ask them to check on him. By dinner time, I was in complete despair. I drove to our house, and as soon as I parked, I ran out of the car, not even having time to turn it off. I carefully looked away from Jackson's house and burst into ours, loudly shouting Will's name. A groan was heard from the kitchen. Will? He sat hunched over at the kitchen table. He looked terrible. His cheek was swollen and shiny with seams. His clothes were rumpled. His eyes were swollen, and he smelled of alcohol. Will, you didn't answer your calls. I was worried. His blood-red eyes met mine. Worried? He asked in a hoarse voice. Will, I whispered, unable to hold back my tears. Will, please. We need to talk. He rubbed his face and winced when his hand brushed against the stitches. Can you make me coffee? Glad I could do something, I first brought him a glass of cold water and then ran to the coffee maker. Will was silent, but I felt that he was looking at me. As the coffee began to brew, he spoke. What should we do now? My heart beat faster. We were about to have perhaps the most important conversation of our lives, and I was scared to death. I turned and leaned against the sink, looking into my husband's face. He has always been an anchor for me. I knew his face better than my own. How easily I took it for granted. I want to fix this. I want to fight for forgiveness. I took a step towards him. Therapy, anything. Please. Will looked down at the table, running his hand along the wooden surface. You broke my heart. I'm sorry, Will. He grinned in disgust. Excuse me? Yes, I'm sure you're sorry. I sobbed and wiped my tears with the back of my hand. I made a mistake. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me coldly. Is it worth asking ordinary questions? Is it worth asking how long it lasted? How many times? Did you do it here? Do you love him? I took a deep breath. Want to know the answers. All his bravado was gone. No, I don't want to. I definitely don't want to. I love you. The words came out of me before I could suppress them. God, how can you say this? You're killing me. I'm so sorry. I don't know how to say how sorry I am. He looked down at the table again. It doesn't matter. Will I think I love you too much to get a divorce, as if the ground had slipped from under my feet. He looked into my eyes. I don't know anything for sure, except that I hate you as much as I love you. I can't look at you without imagining. He fell silent and swallowed his words with difficulty. And we live next to him. This morning I heard the growl of his motorcycle, and it drove me crazy. A faint smile appeared on his lips. I broke my grandmother's dishes. You always hated her. We fell silent, remembering happier times. I remembered how my grandmother sent us this dish from Florida. Will looked at it and laughed, suggesting that they throw it away and tell Grandma that it had broken in transit. I asked him not to be so rude, but we both laughed. We kissed and smiled as we undressed each other. We were newlyweds. Everything was filled with joy, love, kisses, and excitement. Will stirred, and the chair creaked on the floor. This sound brought me back to reality. I honestly don't know what to do next. I want to kiss you and hit you at the same time. I want to get a divorce. I want you to disappear from my eyes. He shook his head with a mirthless smile. God, you have no idea how much I wish you weren't here right now. What did you do to me? Damn. He ran his hand through his hair and sighed. I'm so confused. I'll do whatever you want, I begged. He looked at me, thoughtful. Therapy. We'll go. I don't promise anything. It's going to be a long road, Ash. A very long way, and I don't know if I can. I just don't know if I can handle it. He stood up and glanced at the coffee maker. I changed my mind about coffee. I'll go take a nap. He was almost out of the kitchen when he suddenly stopped and turned to me. Don't make me regret it, Ashley. If you ever do anything like that again, I will leave and tear you apart in court, and I will make your life unbearable. I nodded. I swear. Will looked at the floor as he muttered, If you see that bastard again, I don't know what I'll do. Instinctively, I looked out the window and saw Jackson's empty terrace. I won't be able to survive this. I clenched my fist and felt my nails dig into my palm. I swear, I repeated. I hope you're serious, Ashley. Will disappeared around dinner time. I ate some Chinese food left over from last night. My brain stopped thinking, stopped blaming me. He seemed to have temporarily shut down to process everything that had happened over the past few days. I watched some mindless TV shows until I dozed off on the couch. The next morning, I woke up earlier than I had ever woken up before. The sky was just beginning to brighten. Outside, birds chirped incessantly. It was terribly cold. Then I heard Will sneaking around the house, trying to be quiet as he got ready for work. The fact that he was still so caring sent a wave of emotion through me that made it hard to breathe. I closed my eyes again, not wanting him to know I was awake. Before I left, I felt his presence nearby. I almost flinched when he ran his fingers over my cheek. I had to struggle not to move. He sighed and removed his hand. A moment later, I heard the quiet click of the door closing. That barely audible click made me burst into tears. If I had allowed myself to hope that the rest of the day would pass peacefully, that I could pause my emotions for a while and just be, all those hopes were dashed when I pulled into the parking lot at work and saw Katie sitting in her car. She looked at me through the window, clearly waiting for me. My heart sank to my stomach. Katie waited until I parked and then got out of the car. Her expression was impassive. I was half sure that she would kill me. I unfastened my seatbelt and walked out, pulling my coat tighter around me. We looked at each other warily for several seconds. I opened my mouth to say something, but quickly closed it when Katie walked towards me. I raised my arms in automatic defense, but the movement stopped when Katie grabbed me by the shoulders and hugged me. I shouldn't have interfered. I was speechless. That's the closest thing to an apology you'll get. Fine. She sobbed in my ear. Stephen said I shouldn't have interfered in someone else's marriage. I just wanted to help you. I thought I was being tough love, and that would make you stop and... Katie, it's okay. She pulled back and carefully brushed a strand of hair from my face. I'm still very angry with you. I don't think what I did was 100% wrong, and I don't think we can be friends if you continue to cheat on your husband. I know this is probably not entirely fair, but it's over. I tried to catch my breath. Sorry for everything. She looked at me, trying to find any traces of lies. You better be stupid. She hugged me again. Are you okay? Don't know. I was so worried. I know. She kissed me on the cheek. I love you, chicken, even when you're an ungrateful piece of trash. We were late for work. Bob, my boss, lingered near my desk. The smile on his face was as fake as his hair. Ashley, hi. How do you feel? Much better. I tried to smile. Could you come into my office for a minute? After everything I'd been through, I didn't think I could find it in myself to worry if he fired me. I followed him indifferently, confident that I might well be put on probation. He sat down in his chair, and I sat opposite him. He wiped an imaginary speck of dust from his desk. Are you okay, Ashley? Yes, I said. Neither of us believed my tone. I'm not one to pry into other people's affairs, so I won't do that, but it's obvious that you have problems in your personal life. It's none of my business, but when it starts to affect my business, I have no choice but to give you a warning. I understand everything. I have to tell you that you are on probation. Please correct the incorrect forms I left on your desk and bring them to me by the end of the day. Questions? No. Thanks, Bob. I promise everything will be smooth from now on. Hope. He said this with a patronizing intonation. Have a good day, and say hi to your husband, okay? I froze. A sparkle appeared in his eyes, mocking and meaningful. Apparently, he somehow found out about my infidelity. This was not surprising. Bob was the person who knew everyone and everything. Surely he had an acquaintance in my area, someone who witnessed that scene of domestic discord a few days ago. If he was waiting for a reaction, I didn't give it to him. I put on a sunny smile, stood up from my chair with an elevated step, and cheerfully waved at him. Thank you, Bob, I'll tell you. The next few weeks passed somehow slowly and quickly at the same time. Will and I truly were like ships passing each other at night. He spent most of his time outside the home. I didn't ask where he was going. To be honest, I was waiting for these moments of solitude. There was now a heaviness to our interactions. It was uncomfortable and confusing. The therapist we started seeing said it was normal. The only thing that gave me strength during this time was the knowledge that I loved my husband, and that underneath his aloof facade lay love for me. Yes, I definitely ruined everything and definitely had feelings for Jackson. But more importantly, I was committed to my decision to return to Will. However, I became a real homebody. Sat in front of the TV, screaming at reality TV, and washing it down with bottles of red wine. It was easier to withdraw into myself than to engage with Will. Sometimes I sank into nostalgia and played with fire. I looked out the window and looked at the light constantly burning on the neighbor's veranda. We haven't spoken since the incident happened a month and a half ago. Will was watching me like a hawk when he was home, and I really didn't know how to look Jackson in the eyes now. What could I say? He became a symbol for me, as our therapist suggested, a symbol of an alternative future. Sometimes I would lie on the couch and almost convince myself that Jackson and I were kindred spirits, that perhaps in another life we could be in love. But in the bright morning light, I pushed away such useless thoughts and smiled at my husband. He tried to smile back, made a clumsy compliment about the breakfast, and left as quickly as he could. Restoring a marriage turned out to be much more difficult than destroying it. Motorcycles roaring at night didn't help matters either. Autumn gave way to winter. When the first snow fell, Will had no choice but to stay at home. We watched TV together in silence. It was incredibly awkward, and I was grateful when he said he would go to bed early. In a few weeks, Will would have another trip with his class. We silently collected his things. The same topic was running through our heads again: Jackson. Will zipped up his suitcase and kissed my cheek. "I'll call when I get to the hotel." "Thank you." He walked towards the door, but stopped and glanced over his shoulder, not looking directly at me. "Will you go to him?" I didn't pretend that I didn't understand what "out there" he was talking about. "No. Just tell the truth." "I swear I won't go to him." "Please don't." I took a deep breath. "I won't go." He nodded and left. I hadn't left the house all weekend, and I knew Jackson was out most of the time thanks to the roar of his motorcycle tearing through the quiet of the neighborhood. On Sunday, everything was different. I woke up to loud noises that clearly couldn't be noise from yard work in this weather. Then I heard swearing and recognized Jackson's voice. Not understanding what was happening, I threw on my robe and ran into the yard, with only socks on my feet. All I saw was Jackson swinging an axe. When my feet touched the frozen snow, I screamed. Jackson looked at me from the log he was chopping into chips. He looked terrible. Despite everything that had happened, a stupid wave of schoolboy excitement ran through my body. "Did I wake you up?" he asked with obvious mockery in his voice. "Jackson, go back to bed, Ashley. Sorry to bother you. It's obvious that you wanted to disturb me." He slammed the axe into the tree with a crash. He looked exactly like the little boy in the photo I looked at years ago. What touched me was that he was rejected by Margaret, that he clearly had problems with women. He reached out to me, but I could not reach out to him in return. "I love you, you know," I said, feeling helpless. Jackson stopped chopping wood. Not enough. I saw his breath turn into clouds of steam. I wanted to hug him, kiss, but this was not enough. I never wanted this. "I know," I whispered, crying quietly. "You broke me, Ashley." "I'm so sorry." Finally, he turned around, and I saw that he was crying too. He came up to me and, without hesitation, pulled me towards him. He hugged me tightly. "We can put all this behind us." "Jack, please." I could barely speak through my sobs. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I felt the warmth of his breath on my cheeks. "We can." He kissed my cheek, wet with tears. "I can't." "I love you, Ashley," he whispered, looking straight into my eyes. I half cried, half laughed. "I love you too, but I love him too. More than me." I wiped my nose. "In a different way. I think you and I would make each other miserable. Don't you see this?" "No," he answered quickly. "I will not leave my husband." "You're afraid, that's what you want to say." I screamed. "No, I say what I mean. I love him too much to leave him. I barely know you." "Don't talk about this nonsense. You know it was more than just a fling. If you say otherwise, then you are an even bigger coward than I thought. I'm not going to give you an easy opportunity to just wipe your feet on me and then go back to your perfect life." "I love him for more than half of my life," I screamed. "It doesn't mean anything." I forced myself to calm down. "That means more than enough to me." "So it's all over. Are we done?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, in another life, maybe everything would be different, but in this one I stay with Will. I'm so sorry." "This is complete nonsense," He snorted. He ran a hand through his hair and looked to the side, shaking his head with a hint of a smile. Never in my life did I think that I would beg some married woman to run away with me. I just shook my head. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Don't make me beg. Even if you do, I whispered, it won't change anything. He picked up the axe and threw it onto the snowdrift. In another life, right? I would like to say, let's remain friends. He didn't look at me, but hugged me anyway. When he pulled away, he cleared his throat. I'm leaving this house. I'm selling it to one of my friends. He recently got married, well, basically. A family should live here, you know? I touched his chin. His eyes locked onto mine. In another life, he whispered. I hope you find what you're looking for, Jack. I'm serious. Don't say anything else, okay? This will ruin everything. I laughed through my tears. What will spoil it? Our farewell. I don't like talking to people I'm saying goodbye to. Silence is the best. He took my hand and turned it over, kissing my palm. I knew you were going to be in trouble the moment I saw you drinking wine alone. I let out a sob that filled the air. I watched him breathe, his breath swirling in the air and touching my hand. How strange that he seemed a stranger to me, and at the same time was someone whom I knew almost better than anyone. I would like to know more about you. Still a mystery? He grinned. Well, at least I have something. Thank you. He looked at me, completely confused. For everything. For listening, for helping me. No need, he shook his head in disgust. Don't thank me. It wasn't a favor, Ashley. Jackson looked at my hand as if memorizing it. I don't think I'll ever forget you, he admitted. I swallowed. I know that I won't forget you. He raised his face and smiled sadly. I didn't stop him as he approached and kissed me tenderly goodbye. The kiss was too short, but at the same time perfect. Take care of yourself. You too. I thought that he was leaving. Where are you going? He shrugged. I think I'll visit Margaret, see if she still hates me. Despite everything that happened, I laughed. He walked away from me, heading towards his house. Write to me so I know you're okay, I asked. He didn't answer. A couple of steps before his veranda, he stopped and looked to the side. Then he turned and walked up the steps without looking back. I stood there a little longer, then finally went into the house, cold and depressed. I almost had a heart attack when I saw Will at the sink. He saw everything. He probably saw everything. Obviously, he misunderstood. Anger literally radiated from him. However, his voice was soft as he said, We're going to dinner. Dress nicely. I was about to object, but when I found his gaze blazing with fire, I realized that he was not joking. I ran upstairs and put on the red dress Will bought me years ago. When I came down, I noticed that Will was looking at him with approval. When he saw that I was watching him, he took my hand tightly. Went. The car ride was silent. 1,000 times I wanted to explain to him what happened, to tell him that it was just goodbye. But I felt it was better to remain silent for now. The restaurant he took me to wasn't actually a restaurant. It was a club. Or rather, just a club, as I understand it. There was no food there. Then we'll have something to eat. My friend told me about this place. Will shouted over the music. I immediately felt uneasy. Will noticed a girl who was a couple of years younger than us hanging around near our table. A little later, he caught her eye and smiled at her encouragingly. She approached, dancing, and he took a few steps to the side to say something in her ear. I knew what he was doing. He wanted to punish me, make him feel what he himself felt. Maybe he wanted to end our relationship, and this was his way. He laughed at her words, and she touched his chest. In turn, he said something in her ear. She took his hand and dragged him to the dance floor. He didn't glance at me, although she gladly gave me a triumphant smile. Of course, it hurt me to see him touch her, but it hurt even more when she touched him. If he wanted me to suffer, I was ready to suffer. This was what I deserved. They talked to each other all evening. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, Will took us outside. We'll take her home, he told me. I let her sit in the front seat. Will clearly wasn't getting the reaction he was hoping for, So he went ahead and placed his hand on her thigh. The girl was in seventh heaven. She turned up the volume on the radio and whispered something in his ear, enjoying the fact that she had left me out. Little did she understand the situation she was in. After some time, I realized that we were not going home. It became clear a little later that we were heading to the nearest hotel, the very hotel where I stayed on those terrible nights. Will parked, whispered something to her, and ran toward the lobby. I almost threw up when I realized what was happening. It was a real nightmare. My head ached and my heart was breaking with pain. I knew I wouldn't protest. I deserved this, I told myself. The girl, I didn't even try to remember her name, turned down the radio and smiled at me over her shoulder. So you have, like, an open marriage. I twisted my wedding ring on my finger. You can say so. She blew a bubble gum bubble. You don't look as involved as he does, she laughed. Today is his night, I answered evenly. She pretended to understand. Cool. Will returned with the key. He took us to the other side of the building. We followed him into the elevator. Before the doors closed, she had already placed her hand on his groin, although over his trousers. He didn't look at me, so I stared at the elevator doors. He opened the door of the hotel room, and she cheerfully and happily followed him. The door almost hit me in the face. To be honest, I expected him to make me sit in the corner and watch them have sex. I tried to prepare myself for this at least. Imagine my surprise when Will came up to me first, kissing me for the first time since I ruined our lives. The kiss was hard and full of rage. He put all his bitter feelings into it, and I felt them to the core. He pulled away from my lips. Take off your clothes. I blinked. What? He reached for the zipper on my dress. Take it off. Will I? Take it off. I looked over my shoulder at him, realizing that I couldn't stop it. I automatically turned around and gave him my back. Unbutton me, please. He helped me take off my dress, roughly pulling the fabric away. I heard something break. In the end, I was left in only my underwear. I felt the girl looking at me from head to toe. How strange that this was the least of my problems. Will didn't ask for the rest to be removed. He did it himself coldly and matter-of-factly. I saw his penis get hard under his trousers. Lie down on the bed. I didn't resist. Then he kissed the woman without taking his eyes off me. With a theatrical gesture, he pulled the top of her dress, and her breasts fell out. His fingers squeezed her flesh. She exhaled with pleasure. He slapped her chest, and she giggled. Will pushed her towards me. Put your hands on her shoulders, he ordered her. She glanced at me, but complied anyway. He must have been moving against her body because her false eyelashes began to tremble, and she moaned softly. Yes, baby. Will cupped her bare stomach with his hands. He moved against her buttocks, bending her over my naked body. You did this to us, Ashley, Will whispered, breathing heavily. You. Hope you like it. I burst into tears. The girl became nervous and moved away from Will. Stop crying, he shouted. I couldn't. It was the first time in months that I actually burst into tears, and I didn't have the strength to stop. Will became worried. He stepped back from her and seemed confused. It's time for you to leave, he said over his shoulder. The girl put her hand to her side. Are you serious? Just go, Will said with more urgency. She cursed under her breath as she gathered her clothes. Yes, you are both crazy. You deserve each other, damn it. Just leave, please, Will repeated. She pulled back and screamed. I'm trying. Let your crazy wife stop crying so I can at least figure something out. And give me money for a taxi, idiot. Will said something, but I was no longer listening. I was immersed in my grief and could not pay attention to their conversation. Soon I felt Will's arms wrap around me. She's gone, he repeated. I'm here. I was just saying goodbye, I sobbed. He was breaking trees, and I felt like I had to say something. SHHH. I know. I knew then. Sorry. No, it's my fault. I should have told you something. I didn't want to hurt you again. I love you. I know, he whispered. He pulled my head to his chest and kissed the top of my head. I'm sorry. I laughed through my tears, choking on them. Jesus, Will, don't apologize. I, I love you, he said, having difficulty pronouncing these words. I love you too, I replied. He looked embarrassed and pulled away. Sorry, I don't want to. He fell silent as I knelt in front of him, enjoying the feel of the carpet scraping my knees. I looked into his eyes as I unzipped his fly. I want you. Will shook his head. God, Ashley, we shouldn't. I don't think now is the right time. He gasped when I started caressing him. I want to. I want you to take me. Don't you want to have sex with me? I want it, he whispered, and I saw his throat move as he swallowed. I want to please you. Give it to me, please. Will groaned and threw his head back. Fuck, he groaned. He hastily pulled off his pants and boxers. He threw them off his feet impatiently. His hands squeezed my hair. He was much rougher than he had ever been before. It all seemed so necessary, so incredibly important. Do you want this? He asked. Yes. Say, please. Please. What are you willing to do for this? He pressed his fingers on my lips. I reached out to him, but he kept his body at a distance from me. Anything. Swear. I swear. Soon he got bored and wanted to move on to my body. He grabbed me by the arms and threw me onto the bed. It was cruel and primitive. We rubbed each other furiously, each of us intent on pure physical pleasure. This was not love or ordinary sex. We were wild and desperate. We needed each other. Everything was reminiscent of the times when we first started dating. Back then we hid in alleys, had sex in public toilets, and fondled each other under tables in expensive restaurants. Then we were not burdened with worries about life. Now we had sex, trying to regain that same feeling of freedom and carefreeness. We kissed and whispered fragmentary declarations of love to each other as our breathing gradually calmed down. For the first time since I messed everything up, I felt like we had a chance. I didn't want to rush things too much, but I believed that we could do it. We needed this. We needed to remember the passion we once shared. It was like baptism through passion, I thought. I laughed, lying on his chest. What's so funny? He asked, smiling in bewilderment. I kissed him. I'm just happy. And it was true. Winter was slowly receding. People made stupid jokes about how the groundhog was about to see his shadow. Shops decorated their windows for Easter. The snow turned black and melted on the busy roads. Jackson left. One day I saw a moving car just like Will. He put down the newspaper, picked me up in his arms, and carried me upstairs. He made love to me for several hours and managed to distract me well. When we were both tired, the pain returned, but Jackson had already left. His house looked ominous and empty when I looked out the window late at night. Things were better than ever between Will and I. It was still hard at times, but therapy and that love that never completely disappeared helped us get through it. And then, one Friday, time suddenly slowed down. I was shocked by the news at work and left early. I didn't know where to go, but putting my thoughts in order, I headed to the supermarket. When I got home, I bought in grocery bags and mail. After packing the groceries, I turned my attention to the letters I had brought. As if by fate, a postcard with palm trees caught my attention. I turned it over. The message was short, just 3 words, in another life. I sat down at the table and cried. When I came to my senses again, I realized that there was very little time left before Will returned. I ran upstairs and hid the card in a drawer with clothes. Then I went down to the kitchen and started preparing his favorite dish, veal saltimbocca. To my surprise, Will also returned early. He walked into the kitchen with a smile. What is the reason? I took a deep breath. It was time to stop with my head in the clouds and get my head out of the sand. I walked up and kissed him. I wanted tonight to be special. Will's smile turned into a sly grin. Oh, really? Sit down. I'll pour you some wine. He sat down at the table with pleasure and hugged me around the waist. I poured him a glass of wine and dipped my finger into it. His eyes widened as I brought my finger to his bottom lip. He made a sound like a growl and kissed my finger. I pulled away reluctantly. This evening was more important than us. I have important news for you, I said. Will smiled and raised his glass. Yes, You spent a lot of money on shopping, and now you're trying to appease me. I'm pregnant, I blurted out in an instant. After my words, he froze for a few seconds. His smile disappeared. Then he carefully placed the glass on the table and began blinking rapidly. He swayed on his feet, head bowed as if scanning the floor for some kind of answer. After taking a few steps, he turned to the window, placing his hands on his hips. I watched his back, waiting for his reaction. After a long, seemingly endless time, he turned around and quickly walked towards me. His gaze fell on my stomach. Pregnant? I nodded. His smile came slowly and tentatively. I saw different emotions change in his eyes: joy, fear, hope, anxiety, relief. I knew one of his thoughts was whether the child was his. "This is yours," I said, unable to withstand his gaze. We haven't been together for a long time since then." And it was true. We conceived our child at a time when our marriage seemed to be crumbling. Would it be trite to call this child a phoenix, reborn from the ashes of the first phase of our marriage? I don't care, because that's exactly how it was. This child was everything. He or she was the symbol of our new beginning. Will's warm hands rested on my shoulders, and he gently stroked my skin. He kissed the top of my head, barely touching his lips. "What should we call him?" "Ha, it will be a girl. I can feel it." Will smiled at me. "Okay, what should we call it?" "Carrie, in honor of my grandmother." He squeezed my hands to show that he agreed. "I hope she will have better taste in choosing dishes." My smile almost hurt me. Then he kissed me for real, and my whole body burned from this kiss. Despite everything we'd been through, he could still make me want him desperately with just one kiss. He carried me into the bedroom and put me under the covers. Then he lay down next to me, gently stroking my hair. From time to time, he kissed me on the cheek. Shyly, I pulled him closer to me, as if we were new lovers. He took the hint and loomed over me. I put my hand on his cheek and whispered that I loved him. Yes, I thought. Yes, I made mistakes, I stumbled, I destroyed our marriage, but in the end, I ended up where I was meant to be. I knew Will better than anyone, better than myself. It was black and white, categorical, without intermediate shades, and I wouldn't want it any other way. We walked through the fire and did not come out unscathed. I had scars, and his body was also covered in burns. But we were together. We've been through this. We were going to become parents. This was the new beginning we had been craving. The sex was the best we've ever had, at least in my opinion. When Will finished, he fell down next to me and pulled me close. I felt warmth and love. I want this to be our new future. I want the new we to begin right now, at this moment. In response, I kissed his chest. He was breathing heavily, still trying to catch his breath. We didn't talk anymore. Eventually, he fell asleep. I looked at his profile for a long time. Once again, I thought how different he was from Jackson. There are so many differences, not just external ones. But the longer I looked, the more I realized that they had a lot in common. Both were incredibly emotional. Both lived by the all-or-nothing principle, and they both loved passionately. And both left their mark on me, for better or for worse. As a masochist, I will probably treasure these scars in the moonlight, mentally running my fingers over the wounds with tenderness for the rest of my life. It was an easy price to pay for my sins. Will pulled me even closer to him in his sleep. He pressed his face to my neck and blew hot air onto my skin. Lord, how I loved my husband. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.